Today we have the gynocentric social order, i.e. female-centered social order, with, for example, overrepresentation of women in education, with normalization of single mother families and no decent male role models in society. And this makes society fearful. And simultaneously, this leads to the increase in the power of the government. Greetings, this is Eugene the Philosopher, the greatest living philosopher after the unfortunate passing of Quentin Robert de Nameland, who has been the greatest living philosopher before me. In this video, I wish to talk about our current obsession with safety. So, at first we'll consider a few examples, like actual examples, and then I'll try to propose a couple of reasons to explain these examples in a general manner, alright? So one thing I wish to reiterate, so I've already mentioned this in one of my previous videos, I don't remember which one, so I'm just gonna talk about it again. And that is like the way the media represents the death, let's say, the reasons for mortality, alright? So you can see on this picture, let's say, relative, importance of various death causes in the United States in this particular case versus their media coverage and like public interest in them in general. So as you can see, there is a huge overrepresentation of things like homicide, of things like terrorism, right? Even though in the actual death toll, they take up only like less than 1%. And actually, like, this picture, funnily enough, was tweeted by none other than Bill Gates in 2019, which is pretty interesting because Bill Gates himself later, as we remember, promoted heavy media coverage of another rather unimportant death cause, which you can probably guess what it is, right? The Chinese flu. So the Chinese flu, by very like generous, let's say, estimates, have caused some like 5% death increases around the world, but it's more like perhaps 1% or even less than that, if you are more realistic about it, alright? I may be able to show you some other picture with respect to this piece of data. So yeah, so why is it happening? Why do we overreport these rather unimportant causes of death? Well, for one reason is that, well, it's kind of easy to blame on, media sensationalism or some stuff like that. And to a degree, it's true. I would agree with this. So, with respect to Chinese flu, again, in one of other videos of mine, I've talked about how propaganda works in waves, like, that's why you constantly need a new strain, a new variant, to keep you on your heels, to keep you, thrilled, to keep the hype going, so to speak, to cater to your short attention span, you might say, right? You need this new dose of a sensationalist drug that the Chinese flu has been in the last couple of years. Obviously, right now, the war in Ukraine, again, aka proxy war between the EU and the US, is more of a attention grabber, and it also requires these new waves of attacks and counterattacks, etc., to keep the thing going. But anyway, obviously, this whole thing was supported by the government, because, again, any erosion in societal institutions proper leads to the increase in the power of the government. So the government is interested in keeping people, let's say, thrilled and unsafe and like horrified, right? See my video about terrorism, by the way, where I claim that the governments are terrorists number one all over the world, pretty much. So the society itself and the government are indeed polar opposites in this case. So, and each new crisis actually erodes the societal institutions more and more. Like, again, the examples are numerous, like the 9/11, the flu, the war in Ukraine, the whatever other wars, whatever other crises, etc. They all lead to erosion of human rights, ultimately the erosion of society and its institutions. For example, like, just off the top of my head, like the property rights with the Ukraine crisis, right? How the property of, let's say, Russian citizens and people who don't even have any connection to this crisis their property was arrested or whatever, you know, their bank's accounts frozen, etc., all over the world pretty much, etc., right? So it all, and another moment which is important here is the reduction in rights through forgetfulness, you might say. So we've already touched on the sensationalist mode of propaganda in the media in general. And the other side of this coin is forgetfulness of the society. So each time one of these oppressive new laws gets introduced, yeah, okay, there may be some protests because it's the news. Actually, media kind of tend to overhype this new law, and people are like pissed off, maybe they protest, etc. But this reduction in freedoms that this new law brings, it doesn't dissipate, right? At some point the protests would calm down, but the law remains, right? The reduction in rights remains. And it's actually, again, in one of my videos I mentioned that it has a name of its own, this effect, like somebody's lever. Like the government leverages the situation with this. Like some crisis arrives, they introduce a new oppressive measure, the crisis ceases, but the measure remains. Basically, that's the general pattern. Like again, the Patriot Act and blah blah blah, many other examples like that. And it's again, it's a typical pattern. It's always going on. So, long story short, the governments were able to utilize all of these crises, including the Chinese flu, to their benefits, with all of these, all of their anti-social measures imposed on the society, right? They literally call it social distancing. Can you believe that, right? So one of the things that happened is a huge disruption to the economy, which we're still observing the fallout from, right? And again, see my video on the Chinese flu from like 2.5 years ago, where I've actually predicted this. And then we have the worldwide testing of new treatment methods, experimental genetic treatment, right? You see another video, it was called Final Frontier. I'm not sure what I'm gonna call it now. Maybe I'm gonna refurbish it, but whatever, where I've predicted that as well. So we have plenty of voluntary test subjects for this experimental genetic treatment. And now they are also starting to reap the reward, so to speak, with the sudden death syndromes and things like that. Again, see my video Stories of Medicine, where I've discussed how medicine works and why I shouldn't overly rely on it, etc., And I think the Chinese flu crisis has demonstrated yet another reason, or at least like uncovered a bunch of reasons why my video was correct, ultimately, right? Okay. So the flu has like over 99% survival rate, right? In this other video of mine, I was actually overestimating the dangers. I was talking about like 10% mortality, but now it's clear that it's less than 1%, perhaps much less than 1%. Yet people are eager to even change their genes, right? To have a sliver of hope to escape this less than 1% danger. So yeah. So basically, what we can conclude from all of these examples is that firstly, we are overly obsessed with safety, right? And secondly, like again, as demonstrated by, let's say, all of this over-reporting of the dangerous stuff. And secondly, we are overly obsessed with safety, like in an irrational way, if you wish. So we tend to focus on not on the things that actually kill us, like again, then cardiovascular disease and the cancer would be like in the top news, but rather we focus on the things that only look threatening, or are like loudly threatening, if you know what I mean. So, much ado about nothing, or how's it called? So, what are the reasons for such a situation? For firstly, like again, hyper-focusing on threats, on safety, and secondly, like irrational character of this hyper-focusing. Well, I've already named a couple of reasons, right? There is a purely sociological / politological reason, which is, like from the point of view of media, how the media works, right? And how propaganda works, and how the governments themselves work, right? So there are these reasons, sure, but there are some others perhaps, and let's examine them. Well, I'm gonna talk about two specifically. So one general reason is the way our psyche works in the first place, our human psyche. So obviously, we tend to focus our attention on anomalies. And what is anomaly? Well, something abnormal, right? Something abnormal is going on, and we tend to focus our attention on it. Like almost by definition, right? Only not normal things catch our attention. Because again, it has to do with how our consciousness works even. Like, we would prefer to not invoke a consciousness in everyday life. We live on autopilot, more or less, just like I talked in my Onion of Aliens, part 3, I think, video, see in the description, where I talk about how, we tend to live on autopilot. Because consciousness is a very energetically, expensive technology, right, to actually invoke in your everyday life, so you prefer not to use it, right? You only use it when you actually need it, when something new happens, which requires you to adjust your behavior, right? So we by definition only focus on the abnormal stuff, on the anomalies, because again, you don't fix something unless it is broken, right? So when something breaks, that's when you need your attention, that's when you need to adjust your behavior, that's when you need consciousness, that's when you focus on stuff. So something that is considered normal, for example, dying of cardiovascular disease, or dying of cancer, or dying of, how do you call it, like, whatever other causes, let's say, the normal causes, it's not worth talking about because it's normal again, right? Plus, there is an overall pattern of focusing on bad things, on dangerous things. They catch more attention by default because, again, they require action, right? They are threatening. Good things may slip because, if something is good, you don't necessarily have to react to it, right? Well, it's good already, right? Why would I be concerned with it? So that's a secondary effect of this human psyche being a booster of safety concerns, let's say. One reason. Another big reason is the feminization of society. So women tend to women tend to overestimate the risk, while men tend to underestimate the risk. And to understand why, you have to watch my video on gender, see the link in the description, where I give you a logical/philosophical explanation of what a gender is, from which literally every single difference between men and women follows, this one included. So men are supposed to be the adaptation part of the population, women are the conservation part of the population. So women are overly concerned with risks, while men, they kind of die and nobody cares, themselves included actually, right? So men don't care about risks that much as women do. So today we have this situation. Today we have the gynocentric social order, i.e. female-centered social order, with, for example, overrepresentation of women in education, with normalization of single mother families and no decent male role models in society. And this makes society fearful. And simultaneously, this leads to the increase in the power of the government. Even itself, like regardless of what I've mentioned before, right? So, roughly speaking, the only thing that women can look at for their protection is the government, right? Because again, we have the feminized society, males are weak and kind of worthless, etc., etc. So the only thing women can go to for their protection is the government. So this only enhances all these totalitarian tendencies that I've talked about in my video about democracy and totalitarianism, the recent one. Again, see the link in the description. So there I talk about how this middle step of the societal pyramid gets removed thanks to the government and their informal, let's say, governance institutions such as, again, Freemasonship, social democracy, all of that stuff. But here, this happens basically on the level of the family, where a man gets removed. So our modern family, if you wish, is the government instead of a man and a woman and a child, right? So the lowest step is the female and a child, and the highest step is the government. This is our modern family. Again, see my video, Family and State, for a more comprehensive analysis of this situation. So our near future following from this is actually de facto polygamous society, where roughly speaking 10% of men would reproduce with the absolute majority of women, and thus like the single like a single mother household would become the norm. And at some point in the future, just as I predicted in that video of mine, the governments would start to actually buying children from women. But we're only like literally only this last step is remaining for the establishment of this sort of primordial communism that we're going towards. All right. Again, de facto polygamous and politically totalitarian, with the government being like the head chieftain of our tribe, the tribe being the humanity as a whole, actually, or at least a single nation in isolation, let's say. Okay, so yeah, we will arrive at these, how I call them, like clone factories, right, with children under the care of the government, bought from single mothers, who are single because, again, polygamy would probably not be legalized, but it could be actually. So this is another, like, it's sort of a branching possibilities. We can actually legalize polygamy, so these 10% of men would actually legally have large families with a majority of women involved. Or we can branch into this clone factory, government-centered society, which is, I think, gonna be the case. But again, the possibility is still there for like actual legal polygamy. Okay, and obviously the majority of men would not reproduce, right? Just like they did in most of the history. So yeah, and they would be unhappy. Like women are the unhappiest today in all of the recorded history, and the majority of men are probably also not very happy, right? The proverbial incels. Who don't get access to reproduction. Okay, so yeah, and people talk about, male mental health issues today, etc., etc. They even promote some sort of awareness. Is it a whole month, November, right? Or is it, I don't know. I don't remember. But anyway, we have the suppression of masculinity, again, female-centered social order, and what follows from that is that the actual reason for the mental issues that men face is the lack of purpose. Like, men need purpose, and our current society, modern society, lacks purpose. So this is like really the only reason for any sort of mental health issues that men can face. And like from that stems everything else, really. And then again, I've just described to you what's gonna happen. I'm not saying this is good. I'm not saying this is bad either, actually. I'm just describing what's going on, right? I just work here, as another person loves to say. Okay. So here we talked about our obsession with safety. I gave you examples of media overreporting, unimportant death causes, for example. I've talked about how governments benefit from that, and that's why they actually promote this sort of tendencies and sentiments in the society. And we talked about some of the reasons for that. Like one of the reasons is that, like, how human psyche works, that we tend to focus on dangerous stuff and abnormal stuff. That's why we overly exaggerate the importance of, again, small impact, bad things, for example. And another big reason for our obsession with safety is the feminization of society, which, among other things, is going to lead to polygamous society in the future, with a totalitarian government on top of that. How lovely. Thank you for watching. The eons are closing.